Tonight, the story begins with a very old division. Not of kingdoms on a map or borders drawn by human hands, but of something much older, moving unseen at the edges of our world. In the folklore of Scotland and the wider Celtic world, the fair folk are not all the same. They are said to gather in courts, shifting and glittering just beyond the veil, and those courts are split in two, Seelie and Unseelie. If you have ever felt that strange pull of beauty and dread in the same breath, then you already understand the mood of these courts. They are not good and evil, in the simple way a modern story might want them to be. Instead, they sit on opposite sides of a much older scale, blessed and cursed, fortunate and ill-starred, gentle twilight and storm-ridden midnight. The very word Seelie comes from an old sense of being happy, lucky, or blessed. In older speech it could mean something holy, fortunate, or favoured by fate. When people spoke of the Seelie Court, they were talking about the goodly, fair folk, the ones a human might hope to meet on a soft evening and survive. Unseelie is the mirror held up to that word. It carries meanings of misfortune, misery, and ominous, ill-omened presence. To speak of the Unseelie Court was to name the host of beings who brought harm, who delighted in terror, who rode out in the dark seasons when the land itself seemed to shrink back in fear. But language can be comforting in a way reality is not. To call the Seelie good is to relax too quickly, and that is exactly how so many old stories begin, with a person who thought they were safe. Even the bright court is dangerous. These are not gentle storybook sprites. They are beings of power, older than the churches and castles that later rose on their hills, and they respond to insult, broken promises, or simple disrespect with a cold precision. Likewise, to call the Unseelie evil is also too easy. Many tales warn that they can attack without provocation, that they bring sickness, storms, or madness, but they are also part of the same strange ecology of spirit as their brighter kin. They are winter to the Seelie's summer, hard frost to gentle dew, decay to flowering. They are what lurks in the shadow when the warm lights of the Seelie procession have passed, and the road is empty again. Think of these courts as two faces of the same otherworld. In Scottish lore, the fair folk, sometimes called the Sith or the Daoin Sith, are not simply tiny creatures with wings, but a hidden people with their own realms, laws, and rulers. The courts are one way humans tried to understand them, to sort unpredictability into something like order. The Seelie Court gathers in the softer half of the year. It is linked, in many tellings, to spring and summer, to long evenings where the light lingers on the hills and the air is full of birdsong and drifting pollen. The Unseelie Court, in contrast, is bound to autumn and winter, to days when the wind cuts like a knife and the sky hangs low and heavy. When the harvest is in and the fields are bare, when frost crawls down the windows and the nights are too long, that is when people once said the darker host rides. This seasonal split is not universal, but it is powerful as a way to feel the mood of each court. The Seelie are the light on the hill at midsummer, music drifting from a ring of standing stones, the sudden glimpse of a shining rider at the edge of a forest path. The Unseelie are the shape in the fog you should not have followed, the laughter behind you on a road you know is empty, the way a storm seems to circle a single farmhouse out of spite. Already, just in these first ideas, you can sense how this division is something humans needed. To live close to wild land is to live with uncertainty, failed crops, sudden illness, children wandering into the hills and never coming back. By giving the fair folk courts and names, by calling some Seelie and some Unseelie, people gave shape to that fear and that hope. They created a language for those nights when something brushed too close to the edges of their lives. In this first part of the journey, let the image settle in your mind. Two processions under one moon. On one side, the Seelie Court, bright and terrible, cloaked in beauty that makes the heart ache. On the other, the Unseelie Court, cold and exultant, as sharp as ice and as relentless as hunger. They are not at war in a simple sense. Instead, they circle each other like seasons, taking turns over the land, each demanding a different kind of caution from those who live beneath their unseen gaze. As we move deeper into this tale in the next sections, the Bright Court will come first. Their manners, their laws, their strange acts of mercy and cruelty. Then the Unseelie will follow, with their blizzards and broken oaths and wild, ecstatic cruelty. For now, rest in this threshold moment, with the idea of the two courts hanging in the air, and imagine that somewhere, just beyond the reach of your waking sight, they are gathering even now. When people in the lowlands of Scotland spoke quietly of the good folk, they were often speaking, whether they admitted it or not, of the Seelie Court. These were the fairies you might dare to name out loud, dressed in a flattering title so as not to anger them. To call them Seelie was to call them blessed, fortunate, touched by a kind of otherworldly favour. In stories, the Seelie are the fair folk a human is most likely to survive meeting. They are said to move in shining companies, to ride out in graceful processions at dusk, and to sometimes look on human lives with a strange, distant kindness. They warn those who offend them by accident. They may seek help from humans when they have some need, and they remember favours given to them with gifts of their own. The Seelie Court is often imagined as aristocratic, a bright and noble host. Their nobles wear the trappings of an otherworldly court, embroidered garments that seem to be woven from light, from leaves, from spider silk and moon mist. They dance in rings that leave scorched or lush circles in the grass, and their music drifts farther than it should on the evening air. Around them gather lesser fae and spirits that share in their general mood. Not every being of the Seelie Court looks like a shining noble. Some are small, quick things that watch roadsides and hedgerows. Some are tall and thin as birch trees, half seen between the leaves. What links them is not shape, but tendency, a leaning toward order, toward promise-keeping, toward a version of beauty that humans can almost understand. The tales say that the Seelie are more likely to help than to harm, but that help is never simple. A poor family might wake to find fresh bread left on their windowsill, or seed grain mysteriously waiting in their barn after a year of bad harvests. A traveller lost in the hills might feel a soft hand on their shoulder, turning them away from a deadly bog and guiding them toward a safer path. Sometimes the Seelie even ask for help themselves. Stories tell of them approaching humans in disguise, as beggars, as strangers on the road, or as small, distressed figures at the edge of a field, needing the loan of a tool or a favour done at a particular time. Those who show kindness in these moments may find themselves repaid with uncanny generosity later, luck turning, illness lifting, misfortune quietly stepping aside. Yet every gift from the Seelie Court comes with an invisible edge. They are quick to avenge insult, and they do not tolerate mockery or broken promises. A person who boasts about fairy gifts, who tries to profit too openly from them, or who refuses a small request after accepting great help, often finds the blessing turning to dust in their hands. In many accounts, the Seelie ride out together in what is sometimes called a fairy raid, a mounted procession crossing the landscape in a long shining line. Witnesses describe a glow that is not quite moonlight, and tiny or distant figures with flowing hair and green or silver garments, moving far too swiftly to belong to human riders. To see such a ride was to be both terrified and honoured. To be caught in its path without the proper protections could mean being swept away entirely. The Seelie are deeply tied to liminal times and places. Twilight, especially, is considered their hour, the soft blue-gold borderland between day and night when shapes blur and colours deepen. They favour crossroads, old tracks between fields, rings of standing stones, and the edges of woods where the trees thin and the sky opens. Many traditions say that politeness is a shield when dealing with the Bright Court. If a Seelie fairy speaks to you, you are to answer with respect, never boasting, never giving your full name if you can avoid it, and never accepting food or drink without thinking very carefully about the terms. A simple phrase of thanks, a bow of the head, a small offering of milk or bread left where they are known to pass. All of these are ways humans try to keep on the right side of their unpredictable favour. Modern writers often imagine the Seelie Court as lawful, even chivalrous, bound by strict codes of honour. That idea grows from older hints, the way they are said to keep their word once given, and the way they punish deliberate cruelty more harshly than simple ignorance. They can be patron saints of a kind of ancient courtesy, demanding that humans remember older rules of hospitality and respect. But under all that beauty and order, there is still something deeply inhuman. The Seelie laugh at things that would horrify a mortal, and they may twist a human request in ways that are technically faithful but emotionally cruel. To them, a human life is short and bright and fragile, like a spark in the dark, and it is hard to say how much that spark really matters to a court that has watched centuries pass. One common pattern in folklore is the Seelie testing human character. A stranger on the road might ask for the last crust of your bread, or beg shelter from a storm. Turn them away out of greed or arrogance, and misfortune follows. Share what little you have, and doors may open later that you did not even know were there. Even when they act as protectors, their protection is conditional. A traveler might be nudged away from a cliff or kept from wandering into the domain of something worse, but only if the Seelie find them worthy or entertaining. In this way, the bright court becomes a mirror. It reflects human virtues and failings back at us, magnified through an otherworldly lens. If you picture them now, imagine a long line of riders cresting a hill at twilight. Their armor gleams like dew, their cloaks ripple like water in a fast stream, and their faces are too beautiful to look at for long without a kind of ache. They pause, for just a moment, to watch the tiny glow of a human cottage far below, and something like curiosity stirs among them. This is the Seelie Court, radiant, courteous, and edged like a blade. To deal with them is to walk a narrow path between blessing and ruin, where every small kindness and every careless word can echo for years. And as the bright host rides on into the deepening blue of the sky, the land they leave behind is never quite the same. In the next part of this tale, the light fades further, and attention turns to the court that rides when the fields are bare and the wind tastes of iron, the Unseelie, who do not bother to call themselves good neighbours at all. If the Seelie are the bright procession on the hill at twilight, the Unseelie are the storm that follows when the last light has gone. In Scottish folklore, the Unseelie Court is made up of those fairies that are openly hostile to humans, the ones who do not need insult or provocation as an excuse to do harm. To cross their path is not an honour, it is a misfortune, and often a deadly one. Where the Seelie might be called good neighbours in a cautious tone, the Unseelie are rarely given such flattering names. They are associated with the night, with wild weather, with the haunted edges of settled land, abandoned ruins, bogs, lonely crossroads, and stretches of moor where no one sensible travels after dark. If the Seelie represent a kind of dangerous grace, the Unseelie embody raw, untamed malice. Descriptions of the Unseelie Court emphasize their cruelty. They are said to delight in frightening travellers, in leading people astray, in battering those they capture, and dragging them through the air or across the ground until they are bruised, broken, or mad. Unlike the Seelie, who might punish specific offences, the Unseelie often hurt for sport, as if human suffering were a kind of music to them. Folklorists sometimes describe the Unseelie as a gathering place for outcasts and darker spirits. Some accounts say their ranks include wicked or restless human dead, such as men who died in violence, unbaptized children, or those who made terrible pacts in life. Others fold in malicious fairies from all over the landscape, bogies and boggarts, spiteful household spirits, predatory water-horses, and other beings that relish human fear. Like their counterparts, the Unseelie also ride in a great host, but their ride is closer to a hunt than a parade. In some Highland traditions, this darkest company is connected to the Slough, a terrifying multitude of unforgiven souls and hostile fae that sweep through the night sky like a living storm. Their passage is linked with howling winds, swirling black clouds, and a pressure in the air that makes animals whine and hide. The Unseelie Court is tied strongly to autumn and winter. As the days grow shorter and the land becomes harsh, their power is said to rise. The boundary between the human world and their wild domain thins in the cold months. Some figures associated with them, like storm hags or winter goddesses, are said to stride across the land bringing snow, ice, and biting wind, personifying the lethal side of the season. In this harsh half of the year, the Unseelie are imagined as predators moving through a weakened landscape. They haunt lonely roads where travelers may be desperate, crossing after dark because they must, and they circle remote houses where food and fuel are running low. A knock at the door on a storm-torn night might be a neighbour in need, or something else that has learned how to mimic human voices. Unlike the Seelie, the Unseelie do not generally ask for help or repay kindness. To them, humans are more often prey or tools, resources to be used up or tormented. Some tales even suggest they can feed on human fear and despair, drawing strength from the emotional chaos they cause. There are, however, moments of complexity even here. A few stories hint at Unseelie beings who act with a kind of harsh necessity rather than pure cruelty, enforcing boundaries or punishing those who have already done great wrong. In these versions, the Unseelie become less like mindless monsters and more like the teeth of winter itself, indifferent, relentless, but also part of a cycle that clears away what cannot survive. Humans who knew they lived under Unseelie skies used different strategies than those hoping for Seelie favour. Instead of offerings to invite blessing, they focused on protections. Charms carved into doorways, iron kept close at hand, prayers whispered at thresholds, and strict rules about not going out alone at certain hours. Children were warned never to answer voices calling from outside at night, no matter how much they sounded like a friend or relative. There was also the fear of being swept up into the Unseelie host. Those unlucky enough to be caught by their ride might be carried far from home, forced to join in strange, violent revels, or pressed into service as a kind of living toy. Returned survivors, if any, could come back changed, dazed, or hollow-eyed, carrying bruises and memories they could barely describe. While the Seelie Court tests politeness and generosity, the Unseelie test vigilance and courage. They embody every warning your elders ever gave you about the dark. Do not stray from the path. Do not stay out after sundown. Do not answer when something in the field calls your name. They are the story you tell to explain why a person did not come home, when saying, "They were simply lost," is too blunt for a heart in mourning. If you picture them now, see a jagged line of riders tearing through a black winter sky. Their mounts are not gentle horses, but shadow things with burning eyes and breath like frost, and their laughter strips the warmth from the air. Below them, a farmhouse light flickers, and the family inside draws closer to their hearth, pretending they cannot hear what passes overhead. This is the Unseelie Court, merciless, storm-bound, and hungry. Where the Seelie demand courtesy, the Unseelie demand that you survive them, if you can. And together, these two hosts, bright and dark, circulate through the old stories like seasons through the year, each defining the other by contrast. In the final part of this episode, the focus will turn to the fragile human space between these courts, the rules people created to live alongside them, and the shifting figures who refuse to belong wholly to either side. Between the bright riders of the Seelie Court and the storm host of the Unseelie, there is a smaller, more fragile realm, the human world trying to survive between them. For people living close to wild hills and haunted mounds, everyday life meant learning rules, unwritten laws of behavior, that might keep the fair folk of either court just a little further away. These rules began, very simply, with respect. You did not speak lightly of the fairies, and you avoided naming them directly if you could. Instead, you used careful titles, the good neighbours, the people of peace, the fair folk, all chosen to flatter and to avoid drawing anger. Offerings were another constant thread. A bowl of milk or cream left on a doorstep, a scrap of bread or butter placed on a stone near a stream, a splash of fresh drink poured onto the earth. These small gifts were a way of saying, "We remember you. We mean no harm." Such offerings could be daily habits in some regions, woven into milking cows, baking bread, or bringing in the evening water. At the same time, there were strict warnings about never taking back what had been offered. Food or drink left out for the fair folk was no longer for human mouths. To reclaim it was to invite illness, madness, or a sudden run of bad luck. Once given, a gift to the unseen world stayed given. Etiquette around direct encounters was even more precise. If a stranger appeared on a lonely road or at the edge of a field, you behaved as though they might be more than human, polite, cautious, never boastful. You did not mock, you did not push for names, and you avoided careless promises that could be twisted into binding bargains. Names themselves were dangerous. Many traditions warn against giving a fairy your full name, because to hold that name is to hold a kind of power over you. Likewise, learning the true name of a fairy could give a human leverage, but using it carried its own risks. Forcing power over a being from the courts was not something to be done lightly. Food and drink offered by the fair folk came with their own heavy shadows. Countless stories speak of feasts in hidden halls, of honey-sweet cakes, wines that glow softly in their cups, fruits that taste more vivid than anything grown under human sun. Yet to eat or drink too freely in those places could trap a human in the other world, binding them to fairy time where a single night might stretch into decades. Protection often meant distance. People avoided tampering with lone hawthorn trees, ancient mounds, or ring-shaped patches of darker grass believed to be fairy rings. They were careful about throwing out dirty water at night, calling a warning so that no unseen being would be splashed, and they thought twice before building too close to known fairy paths. Iron, especially cold iron, became a famous barrier. Old tales insist that fairies dislike, or even cannot bear, the touch of iron, perhaps because it symbolized the human world of plows, nails, and weapons. Keeping an iron knife, a nail, or a horseshoe near beds, cradles, and doorways was one way families tried to keep the courts at bay. All of these customs show how people tried to live in the space between Seelie and Unseelie influence. But not every being of folklore fits neatly into one court or the other. Some spirits seem to move between those worlds, or to stand entirely apart, answering only to their own rules. Take, for example, the helpful but temperamental household spirits sometimes called brownies. They were said to perform chores at night, sweeping, churning butter, helping with baking, in exchange for a little cream or bread left out for them, never formally thanked or stared at. Brownies could be fiercely loyal, but if offended or offered the wrong kind of payment, they might leave forever or turn into something spiteful, no longer friendly to humans at all. Spirits like these complicate the neat divide between Seelie and Unseelie. They can act kindly or cruelly depending on how they are treated, and they often feel closer to the daily lives of humans than the distant courts riding across the sky. Some modern interpretations even speak of an in-between space, fae who refuse to choose a court, or who shift allegiance over time. This blurring reflects something important about the folklore itself. The idea of two courts, one bright, one dark, is powerful, but it is not present in every old tale. Often, what matters more is how a particular being behaves in a particular moment, and how a human responds to it, whether with courage, greed, respect, or foolishness. In that sense, humans are always standing at a crossroads between courts. A single act of generosity might draw the notice of something Seelie leaning, a bright favour returned when least expected. A single act of cruelty or arrogance might invite Unseelie attention, turning ordinary misfortune into something that feels targeted, personal, and vicious. As centuries passed, writers and storytellers expanded the court system, imagining courts of dawn and dusk, autumn and spring, blood and shadow and roses. These newer visions build on that original tension between Seelie and Unseelie, but they also say something about human imagination, the need to map every emotion and season to a hidden kingdom of its own. And still, beneath all the additions, the old lessons remain. Leave a little bread and milk if you take too much from a wild place. Mind where you step at twilight. Be sparing with your promises, careful with your name, and never forget that beauty and terror can share the same set of eyes. As this first journey through the courts of the Fae draws to a close, imagine once more the landscape at night. Somewhere unseen, The Seelie Court moves like a ribbon of light through the hills. Somewhere else, the Unseelie host tears across a black, star-streaked sky. Between them, small human lights burn in cottages, at crossroads, in lonely farmsteads, people keeping their own fragile court of hearth-fire and memory, hoping that, until dawn, the fair folk will pass them by. There is a kind of story people tell on winter evenings when the wind is high, stories that start with fear and end in quiet fortune. These are tales of those who met the Seelie Court at the edge of ordinary life and walked away changed, if they walked away at all. The first story begins on a hill that should have been left alone. A farm labourer, tired from too many days of the same hard work, was sent to cut peat for his master's fire on a rise of ground the locals whispered about. He had heard the warnings. The hill was hollow, it belonged to the fair folk, there were rooms down there where no human should lay a spade. At first light he climbed anyway, shovel over his shoulder, breath smoking in the cold air. He chose a spot near the crown of the hill, set his shovel, and drove it down with all his weight. The metal bit deep. Then a voice behind him said, very calmly, "Put the roof back on my house." He turned, and there she was, a woman no taller than his shoulder, hair the colour of peat smoke, eyes like wet stone. The labourer's knees went weak. "You have broken my roof," she said, pointing at the neat cut in the turf. "Put it back. Go home. Do not bring your master's greed to this hill again." Shaking, he set the turf back into place. When he looked up, the woman was gone. He walked down the slope with a shovel hanging uselessly from his hand, every instinct warning never to return. Back at the farm, his master laughed. There was good fuel in that hill, he said, and it would be cut. Years passed. The master's fortunes soured. Cows fell ill, harvests came in thin, and he was always one misstep from ruin. The labourer, meanwhile, found himself followed by small strokes of luck. When storms flattened other men's fields, his corn bent but did not break. When sickness ran through the village, his house was missed. He was never rich, but there was always enough. He never forgot the weight of the fairy woman's gaze, or the way her voice changed when she spoke of greed. In old age, when asked why bad times seemed to pass him by, he would only say, "I listened when I was told to put the roof back on." The second story belongs to a woman who almost lost everything in a single hard season. One summer her cows began to fail, milk drying up, calves born weak, pasture turning to tired brown. One night, desperate, she drove the herd farther than she ever had before, up into a narrow glen where the grass still held a little colour. The cows balked at the mouth of the valley, snorting and tossing their heads. A small light flickered ahead, like a lantern seen through mist. It pulled together into the shape of a girl on a low mound, bare feet on the grass, dress pale as milk, hair hanging in a tangle. "You should not be here," the girl said. "This is not your pasture." "My beasts are starving," the woman answered. "If I do not find them food, we will all be lost." The girl tilted her head, listening to something the woman could not hear. At last she pointed to a darker patch of grass where the ground dipped gently. "Take them there," she said. "Let them eat from that place, and you will never be without a good milk cow as long as you live. Then go home. Do not come here again." The woman led her cows to the spot. They fell on the grass as if it were the sweetest clover. Under the moon, the thin herd began to look almost healthy again. When their bellies were full, she turned to thank the strange girl, but the mound was empty. Only the imprint of small bare feet remained in the dew. From that night on, her fortunes changed. Her cows calved strong and steady, and whenever one animal failed with age, another seemed ready to take its place. She lived to a great age, often telling her grandchildren, "I owe my years to a patch of grass and a girl who was not really a girl at all." The last story belongs to a clan whose luck was woven into a single piece of cloth. In the old days, One Highland family kept, in the heart of their stronghold, a strange ancient flag no one quite dared to name. The oldest tale said it came from a fairy lover who married into the clan for a short while, leaving behind a child and a promise. Wrapped around that promise was a warning. The flag could be unfurled only a few times in the clan's whole history, and only in moments of true need. Once, when enemies pressed close and all seemed lost, the chief climbed the battlements and shook the fairy flag out into the wind. Out of the mists on the hills around them, shapes moved where no allies had been, confusion spread through the enemy ranks, and the tide turned. Another time, when fire licked at the eaves of the great house, the flag was raised again. The flames are said to have faltered, giving the people inside time to fight them back. The clan came to believe that as long as the flag remained in their keeping, some part of the Seelie Court watched over them. In these three tales, the pattern repeats. Those who listened to warnings, spoke with respect, or admitted their need without grasping too far found a kind of protection in the bright court's shadow. The gifts were never free, never simple, but they were real enough to cling to in hard times. As you drift with these stories, imagine that the Seelie host sometimes looks down from its shining ride and chooses where to place its narrow beam of favour. A hill spared from a spade, a herd guided to the right patch of grass, a flag that survives fire and war, each a small sign that, for a moment, the bright court tipped the balance toward human survival. Not every gift from the Seelie Court is one a human would choose. Sometimes the bright host offers beauty, love, or wonder, and takes back whole years in return. There is an old story about a young man who joined a dance he should only have watched. He was walking home late from a fair, a little drunk on music and moonlight, when he heard pipes on the wind, notes too clear and sweet to come from any village band. Following the sound, he came to a ring of light in a meadow, figures whirling in a circle, their clothes shimmering like dew, their feet not quite touching the ground. At the edge of the ring stood a woman with hair like starlight and eyes full of mischief. "Dance with us," she said, holding out her hand. Her voice ran through him like wine. He hesitated, remembering half-forgotten warnings about fairy rings and music in the dark. But the night was soft, the grass cool under his feet, and the thought of turning away from such beauty felt like a kind of death. He took her hand and stepped into the circle. The music rose around him. Every step came easy, as if he had practiced these dances all his life. The woman laughed, spinning with him, and the world outside the ring blurred into streaks of silver and blue. After a while, an hour perhaps, or two, the music changed. It slowed, turning languid and strange, until each note felt like a breath drawn through water. The dancers' faces grew less human, cheekbones sharpening, smiles widening just a little too far. "You must go home now," the woman said at last. Her voice had a new weight to it, as if each word cost her. "When you step out, do not look back." Dizzy and aching, he stumbled from the ring. The meadow felt different under his boots, colder, rougher. When he looked up, the fairy circle was empty. No dancers, no pipes, no glimmer of impossible cloth. He walked toward the village, expecting to see familiar lights. Instead, he found new fences, new paths, houses in the wrong places. The old willow by the ford was gone, replaced by a sturdy stone bridge he had never seen. At what had once been his own door, a grey-haired woman opened to his knock. Behind her, a crowd gathered, faces that looked a little like people he had known, blurred by time. It took many confused questions before anyone understood his name. The boy who had left the fair the night before had been missing for years. His parents were long buried. Children who had played with him were now bent with age, speaking to him as if he were a ghost. He never could say how long he had truly danced in that ring. To him it was a single wild night. To the village it was half a lifetime. From then on, when music drifted over the hills at odd hours, people barred their doors and looked away. Another tale tells of a woman who loved someone the Seelie Queen had already claimed. She met him at a well in a green wood, where the paths crossed and wild roses climbed the trees. He was handsome, saddled horse at his side, eyes bright with a strange sorrow. They met again and again, until the space around them seemed to thicken with unseen watching. At last he told her the truth. He belonged to the Queen of the Fairies now, taken as a mortal tithe, and only rode the earth by her leave. On a certain night of the year, he said, the Queen would ride out with her court, and he would ride among them. If his lover had the courage to pull him from his saddle and hold him through whatever followed, she might win him back. If she failed, he would be lost to the bright court forever. The appointed night came, a crossroads under a high, hard moon, wind tearing at the hedges. She waited there alone until the sound reached her. Hooves, bells, laughter, a shimmer of voices not quite like human speech. The Seelie procession swept into view, more splendid and more terrible than any story had ever hinted. Riders on pale horses, banners trailing, the Queen herself gleaming like frost. Among them was her lover, face set, eyes fixed straight ahead. She remembered his warning and let the first riders pass. When his white horse drew level, she sprang, dragging him from the saddle with all her strength. The Queen's eyes flashed, and the world lurched. In her arms, the man changed shape again and again. A serpent, a bear, a bar of burning iron that scorched her palms, a mass of thorns trying to tear free. Each time she clung tighter, teeth gritted, tears streaming down her face, refusing to let go. At last, the shapes broke like smoke in her hands, leaving only a shivering human man. The Seelie Queen reined in her horse and looked down at them, eyes full of cold fury. "You have taken the fairest knight in my company," she said, and the air around her crackled with power. But a bargain was a bargain. The Queen could not claim what had been held through every trial. With a gesture like a cutting wind, she turned her horse and rode on, the court streaming after her into the dark. The woman and her lover stayed together, but their lives were never simple. He woke sometimes from dreams of music under the hill, of halls carved from living crystal, of a queen whose anger could still reach him across years. Love had broken Seelie claims, but it left scars the bright court would never quite let them forget. Stories like this sit uncomfortably beside the idea of the Seelie as gentle protectors. They remind listeners that beauty can imprison, that kindness can sit beside cruelty in the same shining hall. To walk too close to the bright court is to risk losing time, self, or the person you love most, all in the name of a dance too perfect to refuse. Some stories do not end in quiet fortune. They belong to the nights when the wind changes, the fire burns low, and people remember why their grandparents told them never to open the door after dark. One such tale tells of a winter when the snow came early and would not leave. A family in a small house at the edge of the moor huddled around their hearth, listening to the wind claw at the walls. Just after midnight, the wind changed. What had been a steady howl turned patterned, rising and falling like distant voices, like the roar of wings. The youngest child crept to the window and peered out through the frost. Across the sky moved a dark, twisting mass, like a storm made of shadows. Within it, pale shapes flickered, stretched faces, grasping hands, long, tattered forms riding the wind. "The host," the grandmother whispered. "The slough. Do not look. Do not answer." They drew the children back, banked the fire to a dull glow, and sat in darkness, hearts hammering. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, like a branch, then sharper, almost polite. A voice followed, thin, wavering, exactly like that of a neighbour from down the road. "Let me in," it pleaded. "I've lost my way. The snow is too deep. Please, let me in." The grandmother gripped the eldest child's arm. "That is not her," she said. "Say nothing. Do nothing." But the middle son, proud of being nearly grown, could not believe something that sounded so human could be wrong. He stood, shrugged off her hand, and stepped toward the door. The knocking grew more urgent. "Please," the voice sobbed. "You know me. Open the door." He slid the bolt back. The door flew inward under a weight far heavier than any single person. Icy wind slammed into the house, carrying a rush of shapes. Grey, grasping things like tattered birds with human eyes, a swarm of shadows that smelled of old graves. They swept through and out again almost in the same breath, smothering the fire to ash. When the family scrambled up, the boy who had opened the door was gone. His footprints led only a few steps into the snow before vanishing into the wild, circling tracks left by the host. Another story belongs to a different kind of loss, one that might have been prevented. It happened on the old festival night when the year turned and the veil grew thin, when both Seelie and Unseelie might ride abroad. A farmer's wife had been taken months before, vanishing from her bed with only a scatter of withered leaves left on the sheets. A wise woman told her husband the truth. His wife now rode with the fairies, and only on this one night could he try to win her back. "Stand by the old road when they pass," she said. "Keep silent. When you see her, seize her and hold fast. If you falter, she is lost." So he waited by the road as darkness thickened, clutching a piece of iron and wrapped in his wife's old shawl. The first sound was distant music, thin as ice on a pond. Then came the riders. They were a wild company, long shapes on black horses, eyes burning, garments snapping in the wind. Faces flashed past, some beautiful, some twisted, all too swift to see clearly. At last he saw her. She rode in the middle of the host, hair streaming, hands bound to the saddle. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and she looked exactly as she had in life. He stepped forward and reached for her. As his fingers brushed her sleeve, the rider beside her turned its head. Its face was a mask of bone and wind, hollow eyes burning like coals. "Take her if you dare," it whispered. His courage crumpled. He snatched his hand back and stumbled from the road. The host roared like 1,000 crows taking flight, and in a rush of black wings they were gone. In the morning, hoof-prints marked the road where no living horse had passed. Her shawl lay in the ditch, soaked with dew and smelling faintly of wildflowers. He never saw her again. The last tale is smaller, but it curls into people's minds in a different way. It is a changeling story, one of those uneasy explanations for children who do not thrive. A woman had a baby who never seemed quite right. He grew, but strangely, thin and sharp, with an old look in his eyes. Whispers began that the fairies had taken her real child and left a thing of their own in its place. Desperate, she went to an old neighbour. "Make him show himself," the neighbour said. "Do something so foolish no true child could watch it without laughing." That night, when the boy sat by the hearth, she filled eggshells with water and set them over the fire as if to cook a meal. Tiny shells wobbled on the bars, steam beginning to rise. For a long time there was only the crackle of the flames. Then, from the cradle, came a voice far too old for such a small mouth. "In all the years I have seen forests grow and fall," it said, "never have I seen anyone cook in eggshells." The child began to laugh. High, wild laughter that filled every corner of the house. A wind like a door opening swept through the room. Small, sharp-featured figures appeared by the hearth, eyes bright with annoyance. They plucked the laughing creature from the cradle as easily as lifting a bundle of sticks. They set another child down in its place, a sleepy baby with soft cheeks and an ordinary cry. Without a word, the fair folk vanished up the chimney like smoke. After that night, the boy grew as any child might. He never again spoke with an elder's voice. These are the stories that gather around the Unseelie Court and its shadows, the host that steals through the sky, the ride that tests courage, the changeling that cannot resist its own bitter joke. They remind listeners that not every fairy wants a gift or a bargain. Some only want an opening, a crack in courage, a door carelessly left unlatched. Not everyone taken by the fair folk is lost forever. Some stories cling to the narrow chances, the thin threads of courage and timing that pull a person back across the threshold. One such tale speaks of a blacksmith who refused to let his sister vanish under the hill. She had sickened strangely, fading, staring at nothing, speaking of music no one else could hear. Before dawn one morning, she was gone from her bed, leaving only the smell of crushed grass and a few scattered leaves. The blacksmith went to an old story-keeper for counsel. "They have her in the fort," the old man said. "If you want her back, you must be at the fairy hill when their door opens, with iron in your hands and more courage than sense." He told the smith that on a certain night, when the moon was thin and the year between seasons, the hill would open and the fair folk would ride out. If the smith could catch hold of his sister as she passed and drag her across a boundary of cold iron before the door closed, she might walk the earth again. So the blacksmith forged a simple iron bar, straight and heavy, and laid it across the path that led past the hill. Then he waited in the dark, heart pounding in his ears, the smell of damp earth thick around him. Near midnight, the hill began to glow faintly, as if lit from within. A crack opened in the turf, and out poured the fair folk, riders on strange mounts, flickering figures on foot, all streaming past with the unhurried rush of a strong river. He saw creatures he could not name, faces that blurred when he tried to focus. Just as panic nearly broke him, a familiar profile flashed past, a woman riding side-saddle, hair loose, eyes glassy with enchantment. "Sister!" he shouted, though he'd been told to keep silent. Whether she heard the word or only felt the old bond between them, her head turned. In that instant he leapt and seized her arm. The force of the fairy procession almost tore him from his feet. His boots skidded in the mud, his shoulders screamed. He dragged with everything he had, inch by inch, until her dangling foot crossed the iron laid across the path. The reaction was instant. The horse beneath her shrieked like metal on stone, rearing back from the iron. The riders nearest them recoiled with hissing fury, as if the air itself had burned. For a moment, it seemed the hill might swallow them both. Then the gap in the turf snapped shut with a sound like a slammed door. The bright host, the music, the glow, all gone. The blacksmith and his sister lay gasping on the cold ground. She was thin, shaken, and her eyes were full of memories she would never fully share, but her feet were on mortal earth again. For the rest of his life, when people asked why he always kept a bar of iron by his door, he would only say, "Once it was a bridge." Another story tells of a stolen spouse allowed brief visits home, as if the courts could not quite let go. A man's wife vanished soon after their second child was born. A sharp wind howled around the house that night, and by morning only her shawl remained. Weeks later, on a Sunday evening, she appeared in the doorway as if she had simply stepped outside and forgotten the time. Her dress was finer, her hair braided with bright threads, but her smile was the same. She could not cross the threshold without being invited, she said, and she could not stay long. But each Sunday, when the bell in the village rang, she was allowed to walk the field between house and hill and see her children. So it went. Every week she came, brushing the little one's hair, whispering advice into her husband's ear about crops, weather, neighbours to trust and avoid. She never ate, never drank, and never stepped past the line of iron tongs laid quietly at the hearth. After many months, she pressed a sprig of rowan into her husband's hand and told him there would be one night when the hill blazed like fire. "If you stand there with this in your fist and speak my name without fear," she said, "something will break. I do not know what. But this in-between cannot last." Some versions say he went and called her, and the hill opened wide, giving her back in a rush of red light and wild music. Others say he lost his nerve, stayed home with the children, and the Sunday visits simply stopped. Both endings carry the same ache, a love pulled between courts until the thread finally snaps. The last tale in this set feels more recent, though it wears the same old bones. A lone hiker in the highlands loses the path as mist rolls in, ordinary enough at first glance. He has a map, a compass, and a phone in his pocket, but the signal dies without warning. The familiar trail markers vanish into grey. Everything grows quiet, as if the world is holding its breath. He walks for what feels like an hour, maybe more, until he comes to a small glen he does not remember from the map, a perfect bowl of green with a single standing stone at its centre. The mist hangs in curtains, glowing faintly, and the air tastes oddly sweet. At the base of the stone lies a smooth, dry patch of ground, as if someone had just risen from sitting there. On impulse, exhausted, he sits down. The moment he does, sound returns in a rush. Birds, distant water, a murmur like many voices far away. He half sleeps, half dreams. In that fogged state, he sees figures at the edge of the glen, slim shapes draped in old-fashioned clothes, watching him with bright, unreadable eyes. One lifts a hand, not quite beckoning, not quite warning. When he startles fully awake, the mist has thinned. The glen looks smaller, ordinary, the standing stone weathered and cracked. His watch insists that only 15 minutes have passed. His body and the angle of the sun disagree. He finds the main trail within a few minutes of walking and returns to civilization with nothing more concrete than a story. Only when he empties his pockets at home does he find a small, perfect white stone he does not remember picking up, veined with a thread of bright green like a captured leaf. He keeps it on a shelf without quite knowing why. Sometimes, when the house is very quiet, he thinks he hears music that doesn't come from any device he owns. These between-courts tales, rescues at iron thresholds, Sunday visits from stolen spouses, hikers who slip sideways in time for a breath, refuse to choose Seelie or Unseelie. They belong to the thin places themselves, where what matters most is not which court holds the power, but whether a human heart can stand firm long enough to step back across the line.